Hello. Let me ask you a question. What do you do with a heart that has learned to protect itself so well it's forgot how to open? Hmm. Most of us don't arrive at love or at healing for that matter without carrying something, right? Like a loss, a disappointment, a grief we never quite found the right words for, a place inside the chest that learned very early that staying closed was safer than staying open. Today, we arrive at the heart chakra, and I want to tell you something before we begin. This one is personal. Welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. And if you're new here, well, welcome in. Pull up a chair, get comfortable. This is the Gilded Leaf, a space for tea, soul work reflections, and plant wisdom, for the quiet conversations that live beneath the surface of everyday life. And wherever you're listening from, in your car, on a walk, curled up somewhere soft, I invite you to settle in, put your earbuds in, take a breath. And join me for a few moments of gentle reflection. Hi, I'm Bridget, the writer and voice behind The Gilded Leaf. And if we're sitting together right now, this is the part where I slide you a warm cup of tea from across the table. And take a breath. Because why not? And say, okay, here's my truth. I'm a leaf lover, a tea drinker, honestly. I drink tea all day long, every day, all day, 365 days a year. And with that, well, I pee a lot. Tea has always been the one constant comfort in my life, the one thing that shows up for me no matter what season I'm moving through. It steadies me, it hugs me in an energetic way. The daily ritual of boiling water, steeping leaves, pausing long enough to notice myself. And in that pause, that's where the good stuff lives, the milk and honey of where the Gilded Leaf was born. It began as a passion project, something that I could offer into my little corner of the world to build community, to share education, to honor the beauty of plants and the gentle ways that they help us heal. And here we are, you and me, and I'm so glad. So, before we go any further into the heart chakra and everything that it carries, let's do what we always do here at the Gilded Leaf. Let's steep something together. Now, I've already steeped mine. It's warm between my hands. So, if you're new here today, this section is where I introduce you to the herb or herbal blends I've chosen to hold hands with this specific episode. Each herb is chosen with intention, not just for its physical properties, but for its emotional and energetic resonance with whatever we're exploring together. And today's herb chose herself, really. Her name is, do you want to know what her name is? Her name is Motherwort. Her Latin name is Leonurus cardiaca, translates into lion heart. I love that because that is exactly what she offers. Now, let me drink a sip. Motherwort has been used for centuries across many herbal traditions to support the physical heart. Things like irregular rhythm, the kind of palpitations that arise when anxiety settles into the chest, or the breath that won't quite release all the way down. She has a particular affinity for what herbalist calls heart tension, that tightness that lives just beneath the sternum when we are grieving or when we have been carrying something heavy for a very long time without knowing how to put it down. In Western herbalism, she has long been a companion for women navigating the emotional storms of major life transitions, loss, grief, the kind of heartbreak that doesn't announce itself loudly but sits quietly in the body for months and sometimes years. However, in traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM, in which I will refer to it moving forward, she is used to move what practitioners called stagnant blood in the heart, which is not just a physical description. In Chinese medicine, blood carries the Shen. The Shen is AKA the spirit or the consciousness or the emotional life. And when blood stagnates in the heart, the spirit kind of grows dim. Anxiety increases, sleep becomes difficult, joy starts to feel far away. But Motherwort moves that stagnation gently. She doesn't force anything open. She creates the conditions for the heart to soften on its own terms. And here is what I love most about her. She doesn't numb what you feel. What she does is she steadies the body beneath the feeling so that emotion can move through without overwhelming or sweeping you away. She, as I like to call the mother, she is not here to close the heart. She is here to hold it steady while it heals. So beautiful. If you like to steep a cup alongside today's episode, Motherwort, by the way, pairs beautifully with rose hips or rose petals, which have their own long history as heart medicine, and a small handful of hawthorn berries. Now, as a side note, with hawthorn berries, the thing about hawthorn berries is that you have to crush them first and steep them separately because they require a longer steeping decoction. And so we're looking at steeping them for about 20-25 minutes. And then you can add motherwort and rose petals together to have one of the most deeply researched herbs for cardiovascular and emotional heart support in not only Western but Chinese herbal traditions. So, oh, and a touch of raw honey will soften motherwort's bitterness. And the bitterness, by the way, is part of her medicine. In Chinese medicine, bitter flavors enter the heart. It clears heat, calms the spirit, and brings the mind back into the body. So let's steep it for about 7 minutes, and perhaps we can sit together and breathe during those minutes, and maybe you'll have some reflection. But patience, that willingness to pause before consuming, is already part of the medicine. Let me take a sip of my tea. It's so good. So before we arrive at the heart fully, before we step all the way into this landscape, I want to walk back along the path we've already traveled together in this series because the heart does not stand alone. It is a bridge, and bridges only make sense when we remember the ground on both sides. So, when we began this series, we started at the very foundation, the root chakra, the place where the body first learns safety, right? It's the fight or flight energetic center. The conversation there was about belonging, if I remember correctly, belonging to the earth, to the body, but most of all to the present moment. It's about learning that it is safe to be here, that the ground will hold you. We reviewed herbs that we steeped in that episode, and I do believe they were grounding herbs, right? Things like burdock root, nettle leaf, and a touch of ginger. Roots that anchor the nervous system and remind the body you're allowed to settle. And so the root chakra teaches the body how to stay. From there, we moved on to the second chakra, or the sacral chakra, or the sacral center, however you want to call it, the place of emotion, of fluidity, of pleasure, of creative moment. That landscape was softer, less about holding on and more about allowing energy to circulate. We steeped one of my favorite herbs, damiana, rose, and orange peel, plants that invite the body to soften around sensations, around feeling, around the beautiful complexity of being a creature who experiences things deeply. The second chakra teaches the body how to flow. Then we rise and arrive at the third chakra, the solar plexus, the center of personal fire, the place where identity begins to form, where the nervous system learns the difference between force and true power, between doing because we must and doing because we choose. Does that make sense? The herbs we reviewed there carried a sense of brightness, right? Like dandelion root for the liver, turmeric for inflammation, lemon balm for the nervous system. Because digestion is not just about food. It is about an experience, not just an experience, but an energetic transformation about what we take in, what we transform, and what we're willing to release. And that's the beauty of the solar plexus. The solar plexus teaches the body how to transform, not just physically, but energetically. And so by the time we reach the heart, the body has already learned something important. It has learned how to stay, it has learned how to feel, and it has learned how to act. And now it must learn how to love in balance. Not the version that culture likes to sell us, right? The deeper version, the kind that lives inside the nervous system itself, the kind that survives loss, the kind that chooses to open even after it has been asked to carry grief. So let me tell you something, my beloveds. The heart chakra sits exactly in the center of the chakra system, just like in the physical body. Below it are three centers that help us navigate the physical world: survival, emotion, and personal will. Above it are three centers that guide expression and spiritual understanding: the throat, the third eye, and the crown. And the heart stands between them like a translator. It listens downward into the body and upward into the spirit. And it's just how I love to look at how the chakras work. Without the heart, the upper chakras can become untethered. Ideas without compassion, right? Insight without warmth, and spiritual awareness without humanity. And without the heart, the lower chakras can become heavy. Survival without softness, or emotion without perspective, personal power without connection to something larger than itself. The heart allows energy to move upward without losing its humanity. It reminds the body again and again that strength and tenderness are not opposites, they're partners. And in traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM, the way that I like to abbreviate it, and I'll reference it that way moving forward, the heart holds a position unlike any other organ in the system. It's called the emperor, right? And in TCM, each organ system governs not only its physical function, but its emotional and spiritual territory as well. The liver governs planning and vision, and the emotion anger. The kidneys hold fear and ancestral wisdom. The lungs process grief and letting go. But the heart is sovereign. It is the residence of the Shen, aka the spirit. A word that is often translated as spirit. Yeah, but which carries something more nuanced than that. The Shen is like the consciousness. It's the light behind the eyes. It is what allows us to be present, or truly present, in our own lives. When the Shen is settled and nourished, there's a quality of quiet radiance, a sense of being at home inside oneself. Connection feels natural. Joy arises with effort. The person is, as classical texts describe it, luminous. When the Shen is disturbed or out of balance by emotions like grief or shock or prolonged anxiety, by the kind of loss that reorganizes a person from the inside out, that light dims. Sleep becomes troubled. The mind races at night. The heart itself may flutter or feel hollow. This is not weakness. This is the emperor in mourning, is how I like to visualize it. And the work of healing the heart in TCM, or in chakra wisdom, or in plant medicine, is not to force the emperor back to the throne. It is to create the conditions of safety and nourishment in which the spirit, or Shen, can find its way home on its own terms. So when the heart is balanced in the chakra system, in TCM, in the lived body, there's a quality that is hard to name precisely, but easy to recognize. A sense of, and we've all felt this, right? A sense of quiet joy, not the loud, performed happiness that our culture rewards. No, it's more of the quieter kind, the kind that knows sorrow and has chosen to remain open anyway. A connection that feels natural. Compassion feels possible. Breath moves easily and through the chest. But for most of us do not arrive at the heart without scars. I know I haven't. The heart is the place where grief lives, where forgiveness lives. And sometimes both of those can sit at the same table. There's something personal I want to share here because I too have gone through the dark night of the soul. Because the heart chakra is not something we understand intellectually. It is something we understand through experience, through the places where life has required us to open and close and open again. So, years ago, my mother died fairly suddenly. We had a beautiful relationship, clean, loving, open, the kind where you can sit in the same room without speaking and still feel completely met. By the time I had my own daughter, our relationship had shifted into something quieter and deeper. She had become the elder in my life, what I think of as the crone energy, and I had stepped fully into motherhood myself. We understood each other in a way that felt earned, that felt like grace, I guess I can say. Because when my daughter was about a year old, I moved back home after spending many, many years living on the West Coast in the Pacific Northwest. And those months under one roof, all three generations of us together, those months are something I still hold as kind of a gift. I watched my mother become a grandmother. She watched me become a mother. And that symbiotic relationship was poignant. It was like watching someone bloom again in a season they hadn't expected. There was a light in her that I hadn't seen in years, a softness, a joy that didn't need to announce itself. She would sit with my daughter on the floor for hours, just playing and being, along with, her favorite beagle named Milo. And I would stand in the doorway watching them and feel something I didn't have words for. It felt like a rebirth for all of us. But then everything changed. One summer, 8 years later, she began calling me with small questions that didn't quite make sense, right? How do I turn on the coffee pot? I've been sitting in the car for an hour. How do I start the car? Little things she had done 10,000 times. At first, I told myself it was fatigue or stress or old age, things we tell ourselves when we are not ready to see what is actually happening. But by December, she was in the hospital with a ruptured intestinal wall. There were multiple surgeries, complications that multiplied, and eventually a frontal stroke, which she ended up on life support. And my heart broke. Not gradually, not in stages, but all at once. The way a window breaks completely, and with a sound you feel more than you hear. She passed shortly after the new year in 2017. No, she actually passed on New Year's Day, 2017. The months that followed were a blur. I couldn't feel much of anything. And then Without warning, I would feel everything at once. I moved through the world like a kind of ghost, doing the things that needed doing, caring for my daughter, showing up, but not quite inhabiting myself. I had become something I had never imagined being. A motherless child, a motherless daughter, an orphan. Grief, from what I've moved through, does something interesting to the heart. It doesn't just break the present moment open, it reaches backwards, touching older places, older wounds, older stories about what it meant to be left. Themes of abandonment surface that I hadn't visited in years. Old patterns came back to the surface like objects rising after a flood. I found myself grieving not just my mother, but earlier versions of losses I thought I had already laid to rest. The heart, it turns out, keeps very thorough records. And for a long time, I couldn't feel. I didn't want to feel. It was too big, too scary. What was going to rise up? I couldn't access joy without immediately feeling the absence underneath it. Couldn't quite trust that the ground would hold. But as time passes, something happened. I had a dream. And in that dream, my mother was standing at the edge and end of my bed. She wasn't speaking loudly, and it it's not that I could really understand what she was saying, but I could feel within that dream that it was softer, more like something that arrived directly in my chest rather than through my ears. And the feeling that came over me was that I no longer needed to be afraid of not having her in my life, right? And something inside my heart, something that had been very tightly closed, softened in that moment, in that dream state, not because the loss disappeared, not because the grief resolved itself neatly into acceptance, but because I realized that the relationship had simply changed forms. I had been grieving the physical body that once carried her, the voice I could call on, the phone. I miss her voice. The hands that had held mine, the presence I could walk into a room and find. But the love itself, the love had not gone anywhere. It had simply changed its address. From that moment on, I no longer felt alone in the same way. Not because I stopped missing her, I still miss her every day. But the missing no longer felt like abandonment. It felt like evidence of something that had been real. The heart had learned something that only grief could teach it, that love is not limited to the body that once carried it. And in many ways, that dream was the bridge, a bridge between the physical and the spiritual, between what can be held and what cannot, between the world we can see and the one we can only feel. The same bridge the heart chakra represents in the energetic body. So I want to pause here and offer you something before we continue. One, a sip of tea. Cheers. I hope you have one too. Not a task, not an exercise, just a question to carry with you, to let steep the way tea does, slowly in warm water without being rushed. The question is, where in your life has your heart learned to stay closed? Let's think about it. Not because something is wrong with you, not because you are broken or afraid or doing it wrong, but because something in you, something very wise actually, learned at some point that closing was safer than opening, that protecting was more reliable than trusting, and that staying small kept you from certain kinds of pain. That that was not a failure. That was intelligence. That was survival. And now, gently, the question becomes, what would it mean not to force the heart open, but to simply breathe in that direction today? Not to resolve anything, because that's not what the Gilded Leaf is about. Not to arrive anywhere, just to breathe towards the place that has been held closed, and let that be enough. Just breathe towards it, recognize it, say hello to it. That's enough. From this bridge, from the heart, we begin to look upward. And I want to offer you a brief preview of where we are going in the remaining episodes of this series, because the heart doesn't just hold what is behind us, it points towards what is possible, right? And what I've learned in my life is that, well, above the heart sits the throat chakra, the fifth center, the place of voice, truth, and expression. I've struggled with this chakra for years because this is where everything the heart has processed that begins to find the language, where feelings become words, where the inner life begins to move outward into the world. And that's scary. The throat chakra asks, what is mine to say? What truth have I been swallowing? And what becomes possible when I speak from the heart rather than from fear? Interesting. And above the throat chakra is the third eye in the center of your forehead, the sixth center, right? The seat of intuition, of one's inner vision, and the capacity to see beyond what the physical eyes can perceive. This is the place that begins to understand patterns, to trust the knowing that arrives without explanation, or to see through the noise of the outer world to something quieter and more true. And above that is the crown chakra, the seventh center on the top of your head, the place where the individual self begins to remember its connection to something much larger. Call it spirit, consciousness. I call it the great mystery, the web that holds all living things. But none of those upper centers, not one of them, can function in a healthy way if the heart is closed. The throat needs the heart so that words carry compassion rather than just cleverness, right? The third eye needs the heart so that insight carries humility rather than just certainty. And the crown, well, it needs the heart so that spirituality remains human and remains warm rather than becoming cold and detached or unavailable or above the beautiful difficulties of being alive and being human. So without the heart, the spiritual path can become cold. With the heart, it becomes wise. And so, today's reflection is simple. The heart chakra is not about perfection. We never talk about perfection here. It's not about endless openness or relentless love or having unresolved every wound from every damn chapter of your life. That's out of balance, right? It's about remembering, returning to the knowledge that the body was designed to open, close, break, heal, open again. That grief is not the absence of love. It's love with nowhere to go. And it's looking for a new direction. That's kind of how I kind of process it in my brain. That the heart has been broken open is often the most spacious one, the one with the most room for others, the one that knows in its bones that suffering is a part of being human and chooses compassion because of that, not in spite of it. What I've learned, and sometimes the most sacred thing we can do for the heart is simply this. You want to know what it is? Let me take a sip. The most sacred thing that we could do for the heart is simply breathe. Steep a cup of tea and trust that love, the real love, does not go anywhere. So, my beloveds, that's my little wisdom. So, before we part today, I want to thank you. Namaste. Thank you for being here, for listening, for making space in your day, in your chest, in your life, for the quiet things. I hope this felt less like a podcast and more like a shared moment, like sitting with someone who sees you over a warm cup of tea, where nothing needs to be fixed and nothing needs to be rushed. Just a place for you and me to sit together and think about the deeper things that live inside us. So, if something in today's episode stayed with you, softened something, or opened something quietly in your chest, I'm grateful. Because that's the milk and honey of the Gilded Leaf. Creating space to pause, to listen inward, to remember ourselves with care. And a few things before you go. For this episode, I've included the heart chakra tea blend we steeped today, which was Motherwort, rose hips, and hawthorn berries, and a touch of raw honey to take away the bitterness. Because, like love, it has the beauty to flower, but it also has thorns. Also included in this reflection question for today's episode, in case you'd like to sit with it and write it in your journal or return it um, to the thought throughout the week. If this conversation meant something to you, if it reached something real, the most generous thing you can do is share it. Send it to a person who might need a quiet cup of tea and a little soul talk today. That's how this community grows, one warm cup at a time. Subscribe whenever you listen or not. And if you feel moved to leave a review, I would love the feedback and know that it helps more people find their way to this little sanctuary. I read every one. So join me next time as we move upward to the throat chakra, the place where everything the heart has learned begins to find its voice. I can't wait to steep that one with you. So until then, this is Bridget signing off, steeped in intention and offered with care.